following on from last week's episode with the Apple's M1 chip, and obviously some of these machines are now out in the wild. We've got reviewers testing them. Still early days, I think, because it's only 1 week's worth of testing, etc. But there are some truly extraordinary results and benchmarks coming out from the use of this chip. Basically, side-by-side comparisons with literally the same computer that has an Intel chip, with the M1 pretty much smoking the Intel chip in just about every instance. And it wasn't just that it was smoking it from a performance perspective. There was also the battery life sort of comparison as well. So the key thing that I noticed on one test that one of these reviewers did was they did a whole bunch of rendering out of Final Cut, and like on the Intel version, from battery life perspective, they pretty much had killed the battery, whereas the M1 chip computer had only like gone down 30-40% for the same task. Or set of tasks that they had done. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I mean, we covered this a lot last week, but it just kind of reinforces the fact that they're really onto something in terms of driving the Mac platform forward, and it truly is an exciting development in terms of what is now potentially possible with these computers.
Oh, look, we spoke about it last week, but when you can integrate your operating system with the hardware, you're always going to come out ahead. They're purpose building these chips for the way Apple's operate, the OS, but also the apps that sit on there. So this is fantastic. Look, I thought from my point of view, the most telling thing was we can talk about the performance all day, but it's quite obviously there. And it is impressive. And it's because now, for the first time, Apple's not just like the others. It hasn't got an Intel chip. It's got something different, and what it's got works far better in their machines than an Intel chip ever could. But the most telling thing I thought in the reviews were, one, that neither the MacBook Pro nor the Air had been redesigned, so they still look the same. And then the second thing, these are the cons, by the way, not the pros. And then the other one was the lack of ports. On the Air, I completely get only having 2 ports. I do have to say on the Pro, and we've spoken about this before, give us a few more ports. Honestly, Pro means that I should be able to plug it into anything that my friend from wherever they come from arrives with. And I don't need dongles. I don't know if you got anything to say about that, but that's what Pro is.
Yeah, the only thing, to be a little bit fair, although it goes to the confusion in the lineup, I think, is that the Pro is there's actually 2 lines of Pro. It's not one, and the one that they upgraded with the M1 chip is what would be considered the base level Pro, which is the one that always had 2 ports, whereas they've still got the 4 USB-C port MacBook Pro in the lineup, but it's still got the Intel chips in it. Presumably at some stage they'll upgrade those with the M2 or whatever eventually ends up coming out. But funny enough, you mentioned about that they didn't change the hardware, etc., and that was actually something I hadn't thought of last week, or when this whole sort of thing started to kick into gear, was that I was looking at this thinking, yeah, I'd be perfectly happy with one of them, but I'm actually thinking to myself, if I was in the zone to potentially purchase one, I think I might sit these first ones out. And what my thinking around that was that maybe these are just, okay, we've got the existing designs, we're going to show you how good this chip is by just swapping the chip out, but still using the same, sort of basic hardware design. And you'll go, wow, that's fantastic. The thing for me is that what the next version of this is, they are going to redesign the actual hardware itself.
You're killing me, Ben. You're thinking like the CEO of Apple. I love it.
And it's actually that one, I think, that is the one that's going to be good to get. So, for instance, there's been rumors for a long time around redesigning the current 13-inch so that 13-inch laptops so that it's basically the same physical footprint, but they squeeze a 14-inch screen into it.
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna crystal ball this. If the next one that comes out is like what I just said, redesigned, it's 13-inch body, maybe even 12 and a half, but they somehow miraculously fit a 14-inch screen into it, and they put a touch screen on it. They improve the webcams. They do all the things that people are criticizing these current ones about. With the next generation with the M2 in it, that's the one that you probably should hold out for.
Sorry, Apple. Ben has just convinced me to delay my purchase.
But having said that, if like in your case, if you hadn't had a recent laptop, a recent MacBook purchase, these are absolutely great to purchase. But my recommendation to you would just get the base MacBook Air. Don't even spend a cent more, because I don't really see the value.
I think you are spot on, because going through those reviews, wherever they mentioned the cons, it was always around the bezel, around the edge is still like fairly thick on those Airbooks, and also the fact, the cameras, et cetera, et cetera. So it will be interesting to see. I think the other really interesting point you bring up is that there's the two lines of MacBook Pro, and so even with the extra ports, I don't know why you would get an Intel chip MacBook now at all, but it is an interesting, I guess, question for me. 4 USB ports is not what I'm after. For work I use a X360 HP, and basically that's got that many ports, and it's not a whole lot thicker. Now I know Apple doesn't think like that, but it's really useful to have USB-A, USB-C, to have, a whole variety of ports, like so that if somebody drops in with a hard drive, you can plug it in. You don't have to go to the shop first to buy another converter or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But I think Apple's gone too far down that path now. If anything, they're going to reduce even further the amount of ports that are on there, rather than adding more.
Well, that's not a bad thing. And look, Steve Jobs started this by getting rid of the floppy drive. And at the time, everyone sort of gasped. But as he bloody showed at the time, it was the floppy drive was actually already done. There was no, so no one missed it. I kind of just think that it might be a little bit early to be going no port.
Well, we may get that with the iPhone next year. Who knows? I mean, that whole MagSafe charging thing to me was a huge red flag, to say, get ready, guys, we're about to get rid of the port.
But for phones, I think that's a good idea. There's no need for a port in phones, especially if you're only going to give people earbuds.
And I guess if you get rid of that port, you can, I don't know, drop it to 12 meters underwater and it'll be fine, as they rate.
Exactly, and you probably then can have a complete screen, no bezel, and probably a screen on the back as well. Who knows?